A young Missouri mom disappears out of the blue. When her boyfriend reports her missing, police find a large blood stain in the road outside of her home. But the case quickly diverts into a murder investigation when the same boyfriend who reported her missing leads police to her body. But let's start at the beginning of this case. This is 24-year-old Aspen Lewis of Exeter, Missouri. That's less than 20 miles from the Arkansas border. Aspen was the proud mother of her son Remington. On her social media, she boasted about this, saying she was a mommy to my sweet baby boy. Her social media is also filled with pictures of this guy, 23-year-old Aaron Malone. Aspen listed Malone as her boyfriend on Facebook and even set her main profile picture as a pic of them together, smiling. And it was Malone who first contacted the authorities to report something was off with Aspen. On Monday, November 25th, Malone reached out to the Berry County Sheriff's Office to report her missing. He said there may have been an abduction. Malone told investigators he'd last seen Aspen in the early morning hours of that same day at her house, but after that, she disappeared. While on the scene, investigators found broken pieces of Aspen's jewelry behind her truck, signaling there may have been some sort of struggle. Authorities also found a large blood stain in the roadway. Missouri State Highway Patrol troopers tested this blood and quickly confirmed it was human blood. At first, Malone cooperated with the Berry County Sheriff's Office, giving both a written statement and agreeing to do interviews. That's when investigators realized something was up. Almost right away, they noticed inconsistencies in Malone's stories. Things just weren't matching up with his timeline. At that point, the investigation into Malone began. Authorities collected surveillance video recorded near Aspen's home. It showed Aaron Malone arriving at her house just before midnight on Sunday, November 24th. A short time later, screaming can be heard on this recording. It also shows Malone leaving the house at about 1:30 a.m. on Monday, November 25th. Malone returned to Aspen's house at about 4 o'clock that morning, but made a 911 call reporting her missing before he got back to her house. So investigators felt like they should probably reach out to Malone again, and when they did, he straight up confessed and walked police through every gruesome detail. Malone said he'd gotten into an argument or altercation with Aspen in the late night hours of November 24th or the early morning of November 25th. After that, he offered to take investigators to her body. Malone led authorities to a wooded area where Aspen's body was covered with leaves and sticks. Officials later determined she had extensive head trauma. Aaron Malone has since been charged with second-degree murder, abandonment of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. Now, this is a tragic case, to say the very least. To take a closer look, though, we're bringing in former Department of Homeland Security consultant and law enforcement instructor, Sunny Slaughter. Sunny, thank you for coming on with us today.
Thank you so much for having me for this very bizarre case, really bizarre.
This is a bizarre case, so let's start right at the top. We have a young mother, Aspen Lewis. She's only 24 years old. She all of a sudden goes missing. Let's start at that part. How does an investigation for a missing person begin?
So there needs to be a report from someone that notices that the person is not have the same routine, and that would go to law enforcement, which would then trigger an investigation, because law enforcement won't know that anyone is missing until they are actually officially reported missing, and that the person that is reporting them is asked some question around the details. Well, is this unusual? How old is the person? Are there any medical conditions? What makes you think the person is missing outside of their normal routine? And, oftentimes it's a little difficult with adults because adults can separate themselves at any point in time without notifying someone. But this person, this victim, was a young mother, so that might be seemingly out of her normal routine for someone not to notify her.
We'll get into the person who contacted police in a second because we have a lot to discuss about him. But if we're talking about the crime scene, when investigators get there, they notice they have jewelry that is in the yard. There's also a large blood stain in the roadway. Obviously, that's a red flag to me. We've got some blood. Something may have happened here. What do you think investigators are thinking at that point?
That there is a crime, as opposed to just a person who is missing, that this requires a more detailed investigation, and a look at whoever it is that reported the crime and a thorough assessment of the scene. So the immediate notification of blood says harm, potential harm, and threat, which means that they will change their posture from seemingly calmer and cooler to more focused and intense and strategic around their environment, who they're with, and how they're going to interview everyone else. Broken jewelry often says that there was an incident, something potentially physical, or someone or some form or fashion in which the jury may have either been broken or identified as belonging to the individual, then causes more red flags. So they're going to change their posture in how they're looking at this alleged, initially missing person.
You said they take a closer look at the person who reported Aspen missing, and that is her boyfriend, Aaron Malone. Now, something that jumps into my mind every time we have a story with a couple is that phrase, the husband always did it. In this case, they're dating, the boyfriend always did it. I mean, is that what investigators would look at right away anyway? Because they are so close, they're in this intimate relationship, they take a closer look at the boyfriend?
So the person closest to them would always get the eye first because they need to understand the dynamics between those individuals. Not necessarily that they did it, but what is the relationship? What is their dynamics? How are those two interacting? And that would be with anyone reporting. Why is this the person reporting? How did they recognize that? So they are always going to be like, okay, let's think about, was there any incidents or notifications around domestic violence? Do they have any records of that? They're going to ask those questions of anyone else that they come in contact with regarding these two. What was their real relationship, not just what the individual who is reporting them makes it out to be. They're also going to look at the same thing when you've about the husband and those, even sometimes friends, the way they come in with the report. But oftentimes there is something that is underlining between the boyfriend and the husband or the spouse related to the person who is missing that causes, an eyebrow to raise in these situations.
In this investigation, it quickly pointed toward the boyfriend, Aaron Malone. And that's something reports say that he had some inconsistencies in his interviews. He would tell one officer one thing, tell another investigator another thing. So if there's inconsistencies in his story that he's talking about, the last time he saw his girlfriend, is that a warning sign?
That is absolutely a warning sign. Law enforcement are really going to be paying attention to the finite nuances of what someone says and also sometimes what they don't say. So they'll be looking for body cues. They'll be looking for whether the person is looking forward, to, looking them straight in the eyes. What are they saying? How their hand movements, their body postures, the questions and how they answer them. All of those play critical roles in how an investigator will determine whether this person needs more of a look. But anytime there are inconsistencies, that will always be problematic. Inconsistencies in time, inconsistencies in location and statements, whether there was a relationship, whether somebody else was cheating or not. They're going to look at all of that and say, we need to do more. And that is the reason why these things unfold in the way that they do.
Some of the inconsistencies were actually shown up on surveillance video, which is something we talk about in a lot of our cases. Cell phone data, ring video, it's really become invaluable in a lot of these cases, and this case as well. So investigators were able to kind of piece together a timeline when he was at Aspen Lewis's home. He left and he came back, but before he arrived back, he called 911 to report her missing. What do you make of that choice?
I never understand how people don't realize how much data is available in everything that we do in our cell phones, in other people's houses, how they don't realize that all of that is used for investigative practices to determine whether a person's story matches up with what people can see, what they can track. And so the fact that he called after he had come back, that is alarming and triggering because, like, well, when did you know that she was missing? Before you left? and then you're calling as you're on your way back. So what happened in between that time? That's a big red flag.
Now, he eventually talks to investigators and says, okay, I will take you to where Aspen's body is. He does. He takes the investigators to the woods and they find that she has some sort of blunt force trauma to the head and she unfortunately has passed away. To me, there's a huge escalation from their photos on Facebook. They're a loving couple, they're smiling in their pictures with each other. And all of a sudden, we have him leading police to her body. How did he make the jump from this loving boyfriend to her alleged killer?
It's really interesting that you talked about the Facebook photos and what people see. Our perception is often not the reality of relationships. And when people have all of these great photos and everything seems so great, it's not that every relationship is like that. But what could have happened? What could she have said? What did he realize? Was he always this person? Law enforcement is going to go back to whoever there was prior to the victim to see, was he somebody that got angry easily? What did her friends know or family know about whether they had some violence in the relationship? Whether those photos were the fake photos and who he became quickly. It's often said that who you are in one position and who you can become quickly in something else is a triggering moment. So what triggered the violence that led to murder? This is a heinous case that happened seemingly very quickly, that he could just do this. And blunt force trauma says that she was probably not expecting this from him, not this particular type of violence.
How would investigators go about finding out what led up to this? Obviously, you talked about their past. Did they have any red flags in the past? Had he been physical with her in the past? Had she talked to her friends about it? Whatever that may be. But in the moments right away leading up to this murder, how would they figure out what exactly happened?
Well, I'm wondering if there were any cameras inside the home. A lot of people have cameras inside the home. There might be a recording on the telephone. Are they going to check to see if she attempted to make a 911 call because there was a threat to her at that time and maybe the phone disconnected or maybe not? So I think they're going to go back to that. But they're also just going to ask him, for someone who was so quickly, willingly to take them to the crime scene, he might just divulge it with a very calm and casual conversation with somebody that gains his trust to say, I know these things happen. Can you just tell me what happened in this incident? What brought it to this? And I know we like to see the whole CSI where they got you. Sometimes criminals just say, well, this is what happened. And hopefully that is what will happen in this case, since he took them to the body without much coercing, it seems like.
Okay, you brought up something super interesting to me about how he spoke with investigators, actually led them to the body. But we're seeing some flip flopping with this guy. So he starts and says, hey, my girlfriend's missing, help me. The next thing we know, okay, I'm taking you to her body. The next thing we know, he's pleading not guilty to her murder. I mean, that's a lot of back and forth. She's missing, I didn't murder her, here's her body. How does all of that make sense, his back and forth?
The criminal mind and criminal actions are very unassuming, but also very calculating. So I'm going to report her missing before somebody else reports her missing. I'm going to take them to the body because they've seen the blood. The blood is on my vehicle. They can tie me into it, but I am absolutely going to plead not guilty. I am going to claim self-defense, some kind of erratic behavior or something. A liar is a liar always. A murderer is going to be a person that murders, whether they murder in the heat of the moment or whether this was planned and calculated. Law enforcement is really going to have to figure out where the truth lies so that a successful prosecution will then evolve from this. Of course, he's going to flip flop. It's almost expected because most people don't want to admit who they really are. And he was cold, calculated, a murderer. He knew where the body was. Who else would know where the body was? He reported her missing, but then he also doesn't want to accept the fact that he is the person that did it. even though he knows he's the person that did it. I know that all sounds convoluted, but crime is often convoluted. And you know that from all of the cases that you covered. If it was easy and it made sense, then maybe we wouldn't have these type of cases. But because it doesn't make sense, we seem to keep having more and more. He might even claim self-defense, psychological trauma, or something in his past that caused him to do this. But he's going to lie and he's going to say, well, I really didn't do it, when we already know that he likely did.
What's interesting about this too is that he was charged with second-degree murder, a couple of other charges like tampering with evidence, but also it was second degree rather than first. Why do you think prosecutors would have gone that route?
Because they can't prove that it was premeditated, and and they're thinking, if they can't hit that first degree charge, then they're going to say, well, maybe it happened, like I said, in the spur of the moment. Something triggered it where it wasn't premeditated, it wasn't actually calculated, and they may have gotten into an argument. So they want to get closest to what they think they can prove based on the investigation and evidence that they have, as opposed to going for something that they might have some reasonable doubt that would then cause the entire case to tumble. This case, as with all cases, is going to hinge not only on what the uh, defendant says, but how well the investigation was conducted. And that is going to be critical, as always, because investigations determine the foundation for any prosecution.
There's still a lot we don't know about this case or what information the prosecution has about this investigation. We're not sure all the nuances, as you said. But from what we do know, do you think the prosecution has a strong case against this suspect?
Yes, I do, because he reported her missing. Then, after multiple interviews, he then took them to where her body was. Now, the only thing that I am questioning is there anything in the transfer of the body that they have on video from the vehicle, because they saw him going back and forth. Is there any surveillance in the area that actually captures that part? Because that's the only questions that I currently have around the transfer of the body and the location of the body and how he potentially did that and how much blood was in the vehicle. I saw something that said on the vehicle, but how much was contained in the vehicle, and was there any type of cleanup that they can tie him to? So I think they have a case. We'll see how strong it is.
It's just another one of the tragic cases that we cover here on Law and Crime. It's tough to talk about, but Sunny, thank you for breaking it down with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this. And you're right, we get these cases we don't know, but I hope that people who watch understand how dangerous it is to ignore some of the signs that we are seeing more and more of.
Agreed. It is. I'm glad that I reached out to you for this story because it does seem like domestic violence, and it's so sad how many people it affects.
And even during the holidays, I even wrote something about how prevalent domestic violence is during the holidays, where people become more anxious and the anxiety levels, increase. So we really have to pay attention, and families have to pay attention and not become bystanders that contribute to this type of behavior by ignoring it. And then it impacts and causes the collateral damage, not only of the victims, but the perpetrators and the entire families and communities. We have to stay on watch. We have to stay on guard. Law and Crime does an excellent job of really putting together stories and information that people need to pay attention to. This is not just something, the hype of it all, but this is really the education of what we need to pay more attention to. And thank you for having me, and thank you for all of the things that you continue to do to bring out these type of stories. It's important for all of us.
For now, Aaron Malone is being held in the Stone County Jail without bond. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.